Hi everyone, and welcome to what is indeed the final session for now of our series of 5 online VegFest events. We've been doing the online vegan events now since last August 2020, again in November, December and January in 21, and here we are in March 2021 with our last weekend now of online events. Who knows what the future holds? For now, we're going to be concentrating on doing some magazines. We've got Force of Vegan, Plant Our Planet. You can find us there. But all of these panels, discussions and debates, presentations, performances are available on the vegfest.co.uk website. You can find them up there. They're all available. They're free. We probably had something like over 200 contributions, a whole range of areas covering every aspect really of veganism, animal rights, plant-based diets, plant-based living, recipes, things for beginners, things for people who've been vegan a long time, people who are just getting started, people who are campaigning, a whole areas. And it's been fabulous, and it's all for free. It's a really positive part of the otherwise very, very challenging times that the COVID-19 crisis and pandemic has produced. So before we go into this final panel, which is indeed looking really spectacular, just a word of thanks to all the people. It's been a fantastic time to collaborate. We've been able to collaborate with some really, really valuable groups who've been able to use these platforms and share them and produce some fabulous content. And that's widely appreciated. Lots of lessons learned, lots of growth, lots of development, lots of encouragement. And, these are the positives. And of course, the ability to contact people all over the world, to join in from different parts of the world and really extend a global vegan family has just been also really, really positive. And again, my thanks to everybody who's put in that work, given up that time. And when we come to this panel too, again, we've got some fabulous people, really, really interesting people who come on board. Every movement needs to be underpinned by a philosophy and a position, if you like. And really what I've learned in my 40 years of plant-based living and vegan lifestyle is that veganism really is a set of lifestyle choices that reflects that animal rights position. Animals have a right not to be used. All animals. And that's the beauty of veganism. And of course, with that underpinning philosophy running through the whole movement, we're really able to engage in all the positive aspects of plant-based diets, all the fabulous food, the products, and the campaigning that come as a result of this. But that's something that we can take forward, because I think now, especially since this publication this last year of this book, and the kind of position now ethical veganism is established. Of course, that's not come without a lot of work. Every movement needs people to carry that message through. This movement is not alone. It's had some very challenging times, but here we are, hopefully emerging out of a pandemic with a really strong, vibrant movement, a vegan movement that's well-founded, that's well-connected, that's inspired, that's supportive, kind, and growing, and becoming more and more influential at a time that we've never needed before. And if ever there was a time to come together, that's the time. So on that note, I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to hand over to Philip to introduce what is a really, really fabulous panel. And Philip, thank you especially for the work you've done to do with these online events. You've been a very supportive, very influential figure quietly in the background. And it's a great example of how we can adapt positively to the challenges we found. And I will say thank you very much for putting together this panel, because there really are some great people on it. A very warm welcome, especially to Professor Gary Francione. It's very nice to see you back, Gary. We welcome your input. And at a time like never before, animal rights is something that we really need to be loud, clear, and consistent with. So Philip, on that note, please do have the pleasure of introducing this panel, looking at the Pan-Dharma community here.
Tim, thanks so much, and thank you for your generous offering of time to affording us this opportunity to present the panel, and all the work that you do with Virtuous UK and adapting to the realities that we have in the pandemic and bringing your great work online. It's been tremendous, and happy to be a part of it, and just really grateful for this opportunity. So I will be introducing our panel. Really thrilled by the quality of the people on this panel and their breadth of knowledge. And the topic is the idea of ahimsa, which is a Sanskrit word that's translated as generally as dynamic harmlessness in Pan-Dharmic community. So by that we mean Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, and also the practice of yoga. So I'll be welcoming this panel, beginning with my friend Eunice Wong. Eunice is an award-winning actor, writer, teacher, and vegan activist. She wrote What the Health and the Sustainability Secret, the official companion books to the documentaries What the Health and Cowspiracy. She has spoken at various vegan events and podcasts and was a researcher for the upcoming film, They're Trying to Kill Us. As a narrator, she will be voicing the upcoming audiobooks Letters to a New Vegan and Defiant Daughters, 21 Women on Art, Activism, Animals, and the Sexual Politics of Meat from Lantern Press. Eunice is on the inaugural advisory council of the Vegan Museum out of Chicago, Illinois, USA. As a teacher, Eunice has taught English at a men's Supermax facility in Trenton, New Jersey, USA, as well as yoga at Yoga Stream in Princeton, New Jersey, where she first learned the primary precept of ahimsa, do no harm, to the planet, to the beings around us, and to ourselves. Eunice's whole family is vegan, including her husband, 2 kids, and 2 rescue retired greyhounds. Eunice's website is www.eunicewong.com, and you can also find her on Facebook and Instagram at Eunice Wong Narrator. Our next panelist is Alan Dale. Alan is an American Tibetan Buddhist teacher, a discipline of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Alan is a Lama in the Kagyu, Nyingma, and Gelug lineages. His teachings have included the Dalai Lama, Kensur Rinpoche, Shoden Rinpoche, Garden Rinpoche, Chetsang Rinpoche, and Kentrol Rinpoche, among many others. He has been vegetarian and then vegan for most of his life. Our next panelist is Nico Stubler. Nico is an activist and scholar. They have led animal rights organizations and campaigns in Colombia, New York, and California, and is currently developing policy at Harvard Law School to address animal agriculture's threat to public health. Nico's passion for animal liberation is informed and inspired by Hinduism, a perspective they have taught in yoga philosophy and asana classes around the world. Nico completed their MA in animal studies from New York University, New York, USA, and is working on a forthcoming book, Ban Meat, a pragmatic approach for ending animal ag. And our final panelist is Professor Gary Francione. Gary Francione is the Board of Governors Distinguished Professor of Law at Rutgers University, New Jersey, and is visiting professor of philosophy at the University of Lincoln, UK. He has authored numerous books and articles on animal rights theory and is regarded as a leading scholar in the field of animal ethics and animal law. He has been a vegan since 1982, based on his acceptance of the principle of Ahimsa, or nonviolence, and he rejects the use of all animal products, including silk and wool. He is a serious student of Jain philosophy and has written about Jainism and animal ethics. So welcome everyone, and thank you again for the kind offer of your time to participate here today. I'm really excited for our talk. And the format will just get input from everyone on 2 kind of fundamental questions. The first being, for a general audience, how the imperative for dynamic harmlessness recognition of all sentient beings as members of the moral community is articulated in the respective traditions. So why don't we start with Eunice, and then I'll just go around the horn, if you will.
Sure. So in today's Western world, yoga is usually thought of as kind of like a set of calisthenics, right? Stretching and strength building. But the tradition of yoga actually goes back thousands and thousands of years. And you can go back to something called the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali, which was in what they call the classical period of yoga. And there's 8 limbs of the yoga. The eightfold path is what they call it. And so the first limb is called yamas, which are kind of like moral rules of dealing with the world and the universe around you. And a subset of the yamas, the first one, the very first one, is ahimsa. So the first one of the first limb is ahimsa, which, as you said, Phil, is non-harm, non-violence, abstaining from injury. It literally means to not injure or show cruelty to any creature or person in any manner. So underlying the entire tradition of yoga is this precept of ahimsa.
Thanks, Eunice. And Alan is also very well versed in yoga, as is Nico. So we're going to have a really rich perspective on yoga. But Alan also is, as I mentioned in the introduction, a Buddhist Lama, Tibetan Buddhist Lama. So same question to you, Alan. Thanks.
Yeah, well, the very first precept of Buddhism across all the schools of Buddhism is, of course, non-harming, or ahimsa. And there's a reason why it's the very first. And Buddha gets into it with a bodhisattva called Mahamati in the Lankavatara Sutra, and a lot of the sutras out there, and a lot of the text and the teachings talking about specifically do not eat meat. In fact, the 16th chapter of the Lankavatara Sutra is entitled "Do Not Eat Meat," and I don't see how it can even be clearer than that. And then he happens to mention it over 50 times: "Do not eat meat. Do not eat meat." So he also states in there that if anyone claims that the Buddha eats meat, they are committing slander. I don't eat meat, and no legitimate teacher of Buddhism should eat meat. And it also goes across all the precepts. One of the more important precepts that I'm talking about now on my website is the 5th precept, which is intoxication. And this is an important part to understand that meat is an addiction. And the Buddha explains this in the Lankavatara Sutra of why so many Buddhist teachers will dance around the subject and try to claim that meat eating is okay, or that's beneficial to eat the animal to get them enlightened. He says, this is all nonsense. He says, don't believe any of this stuff. It's almost like he's predicting the future and what they're going to say, and he knows the battle going on with that. But he essentially says that if you harm animals, if you eat them, you're not going to obtain liberation or freedom and or nirvana. And in no uncertain terms, that's the crux of Buddhism, is no harm. And it's, just to wrap it up, I would say, just like in the environmental movement, you want to decrease your carbon footprint. Well, in spiritual teachings, you want to reduce your harmfulness. You want to increase your compassion, and you want to have less of an effect on animals and other living sentient beings in the world. And that's it. It's hard for people to hear who are meat eaters, but it's emphasized over and over and over, in all the different teachings of Buddhism.
Thanks, Alan. And Nico, from the Hindu perspective as well as yoga, we'd love to hear your thoughts and kind of a general overview from those perspectives.
Great. Thank you so much, Philip. Thanks, VegFest UK, for holding this discussion. I think it is like so core and powerful in the movement, or it could be. It has the potential to be. So I guess a quick disclaimer: Hinduism is incredibly broad. So I'm going to do my best to speak to it very succinctly.
Yeah.
Before British colonization, like the idea of Hinduism didn't exist. And the British colonizers essentially created that as a name, as a catch-all category in their census. And so it grouped together what were before 6 different disparate philosophies, or what were called darshana. So those 6 philosophies are called Sankhya, Yoga, which Eunice just spoke to a little bit, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. But there are some core principles that really tie these 6 disparate strands together. I'll speak to those really quickly. So there's one of the most core and central texts to most of these traditions is called the Bhagavad Gita. And there's a line from the Gita, and it goes, "One is dearest to God, who has no enemies amongst living beings, who is non-violent to all creatures." And throughout the Bhagavad Gita, it pulls this line apart, but it's very explicit in that really the highest goal of a spiritual development is developing non-violence in our acts, and our words and our thoughts. And it is through cultivating the sense of non-violence in how we engage with other beings that one can really attain spiritual development and make spiritual progress. The other text I want to bring up real quick is called the Manusmriti, or the Laws of Manu. So it's an ancient legal Hindu text that was written over 2 millennia ago, and it was really served to aggregate and reify so many of these like ideas that were throughout like the Hindu world at this time, and make them concrete. And so it's a constitution of sorts. And it talks very explicitly for a while about the consumption of animals and our relationship with non-humans. So 2 lines I wanted to quote. It says, "Meat can never be obtained without injury to living creatures, and injury to sentient beings is detrimental to the attainment of heavenly bliss. Let humans therefore shun the use of meat." Right? So very explicit in this constitution. The next line goes, "There is no greater sinner than that human who seeks to increase the bulk of their own flesh by the flesh of other beings." And so, yeah, so and throughout all these traditions, the texts they don't beat around the bush, right? They're not like suggestions. They're very, very clear and articulate in these precepts of Ahimsa and what Ahimsa means. The last thing I want to say before I pass it on, I just wanted to really emphasize what Eunice had to say, because within my Hindu studies, most of it has been within the yogic school. And as Eunice said, it's not, in the West, we think of yoga as spandex and stretching. But from Eastern perspective, it really is a school of thought. It's a philosophy and it's a spiritual tradition. And in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali is incredibly explicit in what he means by ahimsa. He goes on to say that it's an unconditional requirement. So regardless of one's birth, their location, their time, and the circumstances, there is literally no excuse for not following through with ahimsa. And he goes on to say there's no excuse for consuming the flesh of another animal. And so throughout the sutras, he makes exceptions and like is very honestly very diplomatic with what he's saying. But on this one issue of ahimsa, there's really no wiggle room. And he's very clear that it applies in all circumstances and all time, and forbids us from consuming the flesh of others and for treating all sentient beings with love and respect.
Can I also just jump in and say that the Yoga Sutras are the 8-limbed path towards enlightenment and consciousness. So you think about it, the first step being nonviolence. If you don't take that first step, you're not going anywhere towards enlightenment. You can't even take that first step towards consciousness.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Nico. Thank you, Eunice. And Gary, and before I turn it over to Gary, I just want to offer a special thanks. Gary's doing double duty. He's already presented at a Jain conference today, this morning. And I had the pleasure of taking in Gary's talk, and I learned a lot, and I would encourage Gary to reference the thing that really landed for me is how I can reduce the Ahimsa in my life by not overeating and being conscious of consuming, living matter. And it was just brilliant. So Gary, please take it away.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you for inviting me. I became a vegetarian sometime in the mid 70s when I coincidentally was taken to a slaughterhouse by somebody, and I stopped eating meat. And I had heard about this notion of ahimsa during I became a young adult at the tail end of the Vietnam War. And I had heard about this concept of nonviolence or ahimsa. And I was really interested in it primarily because, like all of us back then, we were trying to avoid being shipped off to Vietnam. And I remember reading about Gandhi, and Gandhi talking about nonviolence. And Gandhi references the Jains. And I didn't even know, I didn't know what a Jain was. And so I started learning a little bit about the Jains. Then I became a vegetarian in the mid 70s, but I continued to eat other animal products, dairy, eggs, and to wear animal products. And then in 1982, because I had never even heard the word vegan at that point. And then I became a vegan in 1982 once I learned about veganism. As I said, I'd never heard the term before. And I became a vegan and have been a vegan since 1982. And feel very strongly that there's no morally coherent distinction between flesh and other animal products. It all involves suffering. It all involves death. As I became a vegan, I became very interested in Jain philosophy, and I started reading anything and everything that I could get my hands on about Jainism. And it seemed to me to reflect exactly what I thought, that it was found the fundamental principle of Jainism is ahimsa. As a matter of fact, one might say it's the only principle of Jainism. And Jains are all vegetarians. I mean, I don't think I've ever met a Jain who isn't a vegetarian. On the other hand, I've met many Jains who are not vegans. And so most of them aren't vegans. And this completely confuses me because, as I say, I don't think you can draw a morally coherent distinction between flesh and all other animal products. And so as I got into this more, and I found, for example, and I could give you 4,000 references, but this is the Achangra Sutra, which is one of the foundational sutras of Jainism. And the fourth lecture starts with the Ahats and Bhagavats of the past. They are basically people who have been liberated. Of the past, present, and future, all say thus, speak thus, declare thus, explain thus. All breathing, existing, living, sentient creatures should not be slain, nor treated with violence, nor abused, nor tormented, nor driven away. Well, that seems pretty clear. And so I started getting into this more formally. And in 2008 or 2009, I met the head of the Jain Foundation of North America, and he invited me to give the opening keynote address at the Jain conference, which that year was being held in Los Angeles. And there were about 4,000 people there. I mean, it's a huge gathering. And I talked about veganism. And I think it was the first time that a lot of those folks had heard about veganism. And I think people listened very politely. I think probably a lot of people were pretty offended because they did not see dairy as a problem. And I was trying to explain dairy, wool, leather, all of this stuff was a problem. And that if you take the position that, that you have an obligation, indeed your highest spiritual obligation is to not inflict not only death, but not to torment, abuse, or cause to be driven away any sentient being, you can't really you can't really square that with non-veganism. And so one of my primary projects of recent years has been to talk at Jain events and interact with Jains about the moral imperative of veganism. And the event that Philip is referring to, there was an international conference on consciousness that Florida International University put on that had scholars from all over the world, many from India. And it was an international conference on the concept of consciousness. And I was talking about consciousness and its relationship to veganism. What Philip made reference to in terms of what I said at that, Jains believe that all living beings have consciousness. Jains use the concept of consciousness very differently from the way people in the West use consciousness. They mean that any living being has this conscious spirit or whatever. I mean, it's a life force. I mean, you can call it a number of different things, as distinguished from having a mind or mana. Not everything has a mind. Not everything is sentient, i.e. subjectively aware, the way we use that expression. And so they believe plants have chaitana, consciousness. And so what I would, and that, as I say, all living beings, plants, animals, non-human animals, human animals, all of us are conscious, have consciousness. Although only some of us have mana, have minds. Only some of us are therefore sentient or subjectively aware. And so what I maintained in the presentation I gave this morning was that if plants have chaitana, if they are conscious, then you shouldn't interfere with their spiritual journey. Unfortunately, you have to live. If you don't eat something, you will die. And plants are the form of life which does not have mana, which is not subjectively aware, is not sentient. So it seems that they're a good candidate. However, they do have chaitana, and I was maintaining that because of that there's a moral imperative and a spiritual imperative to not eat more than you need to eat of plants to stay alive. And I think that overeating, I really do think overeating is a form of violence. I really do. And I was maintaining that, people needed to be thinking more seriously about fasting, which the ascetics tend to do, but a lot of normal or a lot of non-ascetic Jains don't do a whole lot of fasting. And I was maintaining that should be an idea that is accepted more across the spectrum. However, my main point was to say that you can't draw this artificial line between flesh and other animal products. That if eating meat is wrong, which it is, on Jain Dharma, under Jain Dharma, it must be the case that dairy is bad and eggs are bad. They don't eat eggs, but they eat cakes and stuff that have eggs in them. And they wear leather, they wear wool, they wear silk and things like that. And all of that stuff is just wrong. And you can't. And so what I was trying to maintain was that that Jainism is incoherent if it draws the artificial line at meat. It's completely artificial. And so that was my presentation this morning. But as I said, I became a vegan in 1982, and I just finished my 9th book about vegan philosophy. And I believe it is necessary for our spiritual health, for our physical health, and for the health of the planet. We're all talking to each other now on a screen because we can't travel because of a pandemic, which, like most pandemics, is a zoonotic illness which jumps from animals to humans, and most often in the context of eating animals. And we claim to be rational animals. We are talking. We have a pandemic. We're not talking about veganism. We are facing climate change, disaster, complete climate catastrophe, and some of us talk about veganism. Most of us don't. Indeed, the main movement right now, Extinction Rebellion, refuses to embrace veganism as a baseline principle. So I think veganism is extremely important, and it fits perfectly with the concept of nonviolence. And this morning, one of the ascetics said to me that she thought that largely as a result of what I was doing, Jainism would become vegan eventually. And I said I would die happily today if I knew that were the case. I really would. I mean, it would be make me very, very happy.
Gary, thanks so much. As all the panelists have referenced, despite and they beautifully articulated the fact that it's intrinsic, the notion of Ahimsa is foundational, and yet there's something less than 100% compliance, and I'm being kind, I think, saying that. So I guess my next question would be, how each of you address this fact skillfully as activists, both within the movement and in the case of some of you I know, and I'll start again with Eunice and reference the fact that Eunice in her bio mentioned, teaching in Supermax prison. And I know her as a creative artist to have done some brilliant work on a play that I had the occasion to see called The Trial of the Catonsville Nine, a true story of Daniel Berrigan and others, disrupting, breaking into a selective service office to destroy draft records, to Gary's point about the Vietnam War. So how to address this issue of the gap between theory and practice would love to hear more about that.
Am I starting?
Please, yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Eunice.
This is a really, I have found this to be a real challenge, because as I said, a lot of people come to a yoga class for reasons other than spiritual enlightenment. And so let me start with directly in the class. I try and get my students to, I'm trying to think of a non-cliche way to say this, to be in the moment. And what that involves is paying attention to what they're feeling, to their breath, to being in the present, right? Because that is the first step to being conscious. And you need to be conscious to reach that level of critical thinking, of looking at the way you live and at the way the systems of society are structured in order to see the oppression that is everywhere, right? Like if you don't have that ability to critically analyze, then you're just going to blindly, continue doing what you've always done, the way you were raised, the way everyone around you lives. And, it's a very small thing, but I ask my students to feel what you feel and know what you know. And it goes back to, most children, I think. Like I remember before we became vegan, my son had that moment that all children have of eating, I think it was chicken, and asking, what is this? And he said, it's called chicken. Is it a chicken? And I remember that intensely uncomfortable sort of contortions I was trying to perform in the moment of telling him, yes, it's chicken, but it's okay, right? Even though we teach you to be kind and to love animals, yeah, that's a bird on your plate. Don't worry about it. It's good for you. Just eat it. And I know I was feeling something, but I wasn't allowing myself to feel it. And I knew something, but I wasn't allowing myself to know it because I hadn't gotten to that point of being able to look straight on at what was completely obvious, right? It's this compartmentalization that anyone who's not vegan involves themselves in, right? They can say that they believe in compassion and nonviolence, they believe in peace, they believe in preserving the environment, but if they're not vegan, then there's a cognitive disconnect. And so to go back to this very, very small movement in my classes of trying to get my students to understand, what are you feeling? Can you please sit with it? Asana means to sit with, right? Asana is the Sanskrit term for the positions. At least that's how we use it now. But to sit with what you're feeling and what you know. Outside of the classes, I have done things like I've brought in copies of, What the Health or The Sustainability Secret, and just been like, hey, I have books here if anyone wants to pick some up and they're here for you. So trying to bring it in that way. But it is hard because people come into a yoga class not open to those kinds of changes.
Eunice, thanks so much. Alan, would love to hear from you on the same question about kind of the activism, closing that gap between theory and practice. And we'll just take a quick moment again to say, with appreciation for your work with vegan Buddhism, and particularly on the Facebook group, which is so active and a great resource for so many people, myself included. So thanks. Turn it over to you.
Yeah, I get a lot of compliments, and it's in itself running the vegan Buddhism discussion group on Facebook is a path as well for me, because what I'm trying to do is educate people into why they should do the things that they should probably do. Now, I know these things myself personally, but I have to be very compassionate and I have to be very patient and take them on a journey. I get some pretty hardcore monks who have been practicing for a better part of their life, and they get offended by some of the things that are on there. And they'll even claim that some of this stuff should be removed. And I'll give you one example. I had a Tibetan monk in Mongolia who said, I really like and appreciate the teachings and the things that are in vegan Buddhism, but I think I need to leave the group because I'm offended by all the people saying I should probably stop eating dairy. And I said, well, how does that make you feel? He says, I feel awful about it, that I may be harming animals because of this. And I said, well, instead of leaving the group, you might want to stay with those feelings, explore those feelings a little bit more, and maybe get a little educated through that. Of why do you have these feelings? Examine your feelings. And he says, well, I live someplace where, it's impossible. I have to eat dairy. And it's just something I ignore because I can't become vegan. And I said, do you get mail delivery there? Oh, yes, I get packages from all over the world, so on and so forth. And I said, you could have vegan food mailed to you. I mean, if it's absolutely impossible. And I said, do you guys have rice? Yes. Do you have beans? Yes. Do you have lentils? Yes. And we kind of went through the list, and it says, sounds like to me, if you have fruits and vegetables and all these other things, you really don't need to consume dairy. So I encourage you to stay on the group. And then there's a lot of people who think they are the experts. Some of them are scholars. Some of them are hardcore teachers with lots of followers. And they will text message me on the side, and we'll continue with these things. But it's a matter of patience and educating. It's also really hard because people will bash one another on there. Well, the Dalai Lama, he eats meat, and one of the rules of the group is you cannot be critical of anybody in the Sangha. You have to be understanding and not bash your teachers or say that they're bad people because they eat meat or eat dairy. They are human beings, and they're going through a process just like everybody else. And you should view all beings with compassion and all teachers with compassion. And if you're growing from that, you should continue. Then on a more personal level, my private students, which right now I don't teach as many students because I'm focusing on my writings, because my students are like, all the knowledge that you have, you really got to get it into book form. But here's something really crucial where I try to bring it back to the individual. And it's based upon the resting breath rate. What's really interesting is the lower your breath rate is, the easier it is to get into more advanced states of meditation. And so I have them check their pulse and also the breath rate in the early morning. In breath and out breath. Okay, so I try to get them to have a blank mind and not to think about anything. Don't have your coffee yet or anything that might stimulate you, but just monitor your breath. Then maybe try something like eliminate dairy out of your diet, and does that somehow affect your resting breath rate? What we have noticed, and most sages and most advanced yogis will notice, that certain things will overstimulate or permanently somewhat put their breath rate at a much higher rate. They say the average American breathes anywhere between 12 to 18 breaths per minute. Well, the average yogi breathes between 4 and 6 breaths per minute, because not only is it the physical stuff, it's also what they're exposed to. Are you breathing clean air? Are you drinking pure water? Maybe the simple thing of putting a water purifier on your shower to eliminate the toxins from the water will also lower your breath rate. But then it goes even deeper. Your emotions. Are you a happy person? Are you an angry person? Angry people typically have higher breath rates, resting breath rates. So I have them keep a little log every morning when they get up, have them start writing this. And they said, well, what does my breath rate need to reach in order for me to have a transcendental experience? And I says, it needs to be 0. You need to go into a breathless state in order to experience these advanced states. And I said, where would you like to start with your hour meditation or 30-minute or 20-minute meditation? Do you want to start at 18 breaths per minute, or do you want to start at 4 or 6 breaths per minute? It's going to be a lot faster for you to get down to a still state of breath when the body doesn't have to deal with so much stress. So I had one student, he says, I can't give up smoking, and I really love to do, smoke my pot. And I says, I love acid and mushrooms and, alcohol and all these other things. And I said, you don't have to give up anything. He says, I don't have to give up cigarettes. I said, no, you don't. You will learn to give it up yourself. Your body will tell you when you get to more advanced states, you're going to go from maybe a tamasic state to a more rajasic state to more of a sattvic state. And that's kind of like the essence of being a bodhisattva, one who becomes more sattvic and transitions from those gunas into a more sattvic state in their life. And I'm just getting into some terms that other people that are watching this video may not understand, but this is stuff that's tied in yoga and the Samkhya philosophy and the deeper yoga systems of Patanjali. It's important to understand the gunas and the Purusha and the Prakriti and understand all those different functions. And those also follow into Buddhism. In Buddhism, you have your external religion, but then you have your esoteric yogis, your guys that get into very advanced states. And they learn to live off a more refined energy. So somebody wanted to go on this journey to see how does this really help me? Well, try to eliminate something and see how it affects your resting breath rate. And as your resting breath rate goes down, you're naturally going to give up cigarettes, overeating. You're going to give up eggs. You're going to give up dairy. This is why Ahimsa and not eating meat goes far above and beyond that. It goes into dairy and other things. It also involves the environment. You need to breathe clean air. You need pure water. If you live in an environment of pollution and degradation of the environment, it's going to negatively affect you. So this is a ultimate healing of ourselves, of all the animals, and a healing of the planet. This is a natural evolution, but we all need to be very patient for those people that we care about who haven't made that realization yet. So you have to do the best you can. Nobody can change somebody else's mind. They have to change their own mind. All you can do is kind of point the way, and they have to discover on their own, their own reality and how to go on this journey. So that's what I do with vegan Buddhism. I try not to monitor it so much, but if I see somebody struggling with something, I'll kind of pull them aside, especially if they're a very advanced teacher and they're really struggling with some of these things. All my students are telling me I should become vegan. Well, what is that telling you? I don't want to sound preachy or anything of that sort. That's called bat song. You want sat song, not bat song. You don't want to tell people what to do. You want to have a conversation and take them on a conversation and take them on that journey. And I think that's the key point for transition within our society and within ourselves and all the people that we love and we care about. And that's basically it.
Alan, thanks so much. That was fantastic. So appreciate it. Nico, I know, not only, I mean, within the Hindu community and yoga, but also I know your activism extends much further beyond that. So I'd love to hear your perspectives. Great.
Thank you, Philip. And I mean, just to reiterate, it's been so lovely listening to everybody sharing your thoughts and learning a lot. Yeah, so as Eunice mentioned earlier, like a lot of folk who come to these classes aren't coming to like become enlightened, perhaps. They might be just trying to get into better. And speaking of yoga classes in particular, asana classes. But even so, I do think that these communities, whether there be of movement communities or mindfulness communities or like spiritual development communities, are incredibly, I guess they're the perfect like feeding ground for feeding into this movement. And it's never going to be 100%, but I think they're very unique communities and they're very ripe for growth. So I have three, I guess, general comments and general suggestions that can be really applied to, I think, any form of activism, but it's also what I do when I teach yoga. And the first is to be very direct, but empathetic. Like I don't beat around bushes. I'm very, very clear in what I guess we all believe. And I don't make excuses for folk and make exceptions. But I think we can also do that empathetically, right? And I when I say these comments to students, I see myself in their shoes, on their mats, and I wish someone had told me this in my first 18 years of life before I went vegan, right? So it's not like I'm telling. I think we can say it from our heart and really believe that it's what is best for them, it's what's best for everybody, and to share it with compassion, but to not beat around bushes. The second point is to take every opportunity to do so. So every single asana class or philosophy class I teach, I always begin with a discussion of Ahimsa and a discussion of animal rights. And I mean, we have the opportunity to do it. I think it's, and if you have like the platform to be bringing this up in communities, I think it's incumbent upon us to be doing so. I think that's an act of nonviolence, and failing to do so is not furthering the cause. And the last point is to keep the people who we're fighting for in our mind's eye whenever we're having these discussions or saying these things. So whenever I tap into these kind of discussions, I immediately think about the experiences that I've had in slaughterhouses and factory farms, and also the experiences that I've had on sanctuaries, right? And so thinking about these people, thinking about the suffering and like the catastrophic suffering that they're seeing every day, and centering them in my mind's eye when I'm having these discussions. And the discussions can be tough and they can raise anxieties within us, but I think as long as we have clear, like when I think of certain pigs that I've tried like interact with in slaughterhouses, like those are the people that I want to have here when I'm having these discussions. And I'll just close with a quick personal anecdote. So I was teaching in Colombia in Medellin for a while, for about a year. Had a lot of students, like foreigners coming through and locals, but I was teaching English and Spanish, but a lot of people who just come through pretty frequently. And I always just hammer home my animal rights message for the first 10 minutes of class, and then the next 80 minutes we can tap into some physical stuff. And two and a half years later, I was at a protest in the Bay Area, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and one of the activists came up to me. And turned out he had been a student of mine at a yoga class in Colombia, was not vegan at the time, and got turned on to this stuff from that discussion in the class, and was then taking action. And so it's just like, it was a really powerful reminder that these interactions that we have that can seem ephemeral and unimportant in a 5-minute discussion really can plant seeds and really can lead to deep systemic societal change.
Brilliant. Nico, thanks so much. Gary, you spoke a bit about on this topic with the exchange you mentioned today at the conference, which was brilliant. And, you really got my attention. You said you would die happy today if this, initiative was actually enacted. But any more you could say about, kind of closing that gap between theory and practice would be great.
Well, I mean, the only hope, the best hope that we have for a group of people as an ideological matter embracing veganism are the Jains and perhaps other traditions, but certainly the Jains. And I think that may happen in my lifetime. Depends how much longer I live. But because I certainly don't see that. I as you know, Philip, I think that the animal movement is a disaster. It's a complete disaster. And I'll talk about that in a second. It embraces welfareism, it embraces single issue campaigns, it embraces there is not one single large organization in this country, Britain, or any place else that I'm aware of that advocates for veganism as a moral baseline. It's something which is we have an obligation to do it. It's not just an aspirational thing, it's an obligation we have right now. But what do I do? My activism, let me talk first about my functioning in the Jain community. What I do with the Jain community is what I did this morning. I write things. I write essays about Jainism and veganism. I give lectures like the one I did this morning. I do that quite a bit. I go to Jain centers. I go to Jain temples and talk about this stuff. One of the things I had to do, and it required a fair amount of work, was I had to actually learn. I had to learn the doctrine in a way so that I was able to discuss it with people who were, the monks and the people who are the monks, the nuns, the people who are experts in the theory. I had to be able I had to learn that stuff, and so that I could have those discussions and that I could write credibly about it, the idea. And the biggest problem I've had, the biggest obstacle I've had is the Jains have a doctrine called anikantvad, which means basically relativism. It's the doctrine of many-sidedness. Actually, that's what it means technically, is the doctrine of many-sidedness. And it developed actually historically. Something else I had to learn. I had to learn all about this particular doctrine, was that it developed as a sort of a middle way between the sort of the Hindu approach and the Buddhist approach about permanence and impermanence with respect to the material world. And what happened was in the 20th century, it's a medieval doctrine, basically. In the 20th century, this got translated into sort of a moral relativism, so that it became identified as a doctrine that said, well, if you take a dogmatic approach, that's a form of violence. Now, I think that that's complete nonsense. As I said this morning, I think that that's complete nonsense. That if you maintain, one of the responses I've gotten when I'm talking about veganism with the Jain community is to say that people say, well, you can't say that dairy is absolutely wrong. And I said, no, I can absolutely say that dairy is absolutely wrong. So is leather, so is wool, so is silk, so are eggs, everything. And it doesn't matter how they're raised. It doesn't matter whether it's in a factory farm or in a family farm or any of this sort of stuff. As I pointed out this morning, that's like saying, you have one slaveholder that is humane and the more humane, and the other slaveholder who is less humane. Well, obviously, the one who's more humane is doing less harm on one level, but you can't. That doesn't answer the question about the legitimacy of slavery. Same thing with factory farms, or happy meat or non-happy meat, or Ahimsa milk, or all this nonsense. Is are there ways to exploit animals in less in less odious ways? And the answer is yes, of course there are. It's a question of how much money you're willing to pay for the products. But that it doesn't matter how humane they are, they're wrong. And so I've encountered this idea with people that, but you can't take a dogmatic approach. And I'm sorry, I do take a dogmatic approach, because I believe not to take a dogmatic approach is itself ahimsa, is ahimsic rather. It's not consistent with nonviolence to not be clear about stuff. And I agree with the previous comments about you have to be empathetic. There's no reason to, go out of your way to piss people off. But on the other hand, you have to be very, very clear with people. And so when I have a Jain scholar or an ascetic telling me And I've been in these somewhat difficult conversations where they say, well, I appreciate your view, but, you can't really say it's absolute truth. And, I have to and I figured out a way, basically, they keep inviting me back, so it can't be too problematic. But I always say, no, I can say it's absolutely wrong. If you are drinking milk, if you are wearing leather, if you are wearing wool, you are a direct participant in Ahimsa imposed on mobile multi-sense beings who are sentient, and that can't work. And so and so I've had I actually think one of the contributions I've made is to sort of is articulate this doctrine of anikantvad, or many-sidedness, to sort of explain that it may make sense, and it does make sense, when we're talking about knowledge of the material world. Unless you are omniscient, you don't really have an insight. You can't really know all aspects of reality. But that doesn't mean that you can't say that ahimsa is an absolutely true moral principle and a correct moral principle, and that if ahimsa is a true and correct moral principle, it necessarily includes all direct participation in animal exploitation, all of it. And so it's been interesting. And as I say, they keep inviting me back, and they're always very gracious. And this morning when we were having when I was doing that thing, I don't know if the comments were whether you could see the comments, but I got a comment from somebody who said, why are you trying to pressure people? Why are you trying to pressure vegetarians to go vegan? And I said, I'm not trying to pressure anybody to do anything. I'm just explaining to them that there's no morally coherent distinction between meat and other animal products. And that, that if you, that saying that you're a vegetarian but not a vegan is like saying, well, I eat the meat from large cows, but I won't eat the meat from medium-sized cows. Everybody would realize that as being a completely arbitrary, insane position. But what else do I do? I don't go to the Jaina conferences anymore because I find them offensive, because they're 4 days of celebrating ahimsa while people consume more animal products than you could possibly imagine. So what I do is I water fast for those 4 days, and I post comments during the 4 days about how it should, and I suspect it will eventually become a vegan conference. But and I never go. Not that any of us goes anywhere anymore because of of COVID. But in the times when I was invited places, I would never go. The condition of my going, I never charge a speaking fee. Never have. My condition for going to these things is, I don't want any animal products there. I don't want no milk, no ghee, no anything. And if there's going to be food, it's got to be completely vegan, and if you're not willing to do that, then I'm not willing to go, because you're not serious about ahimsa, and you ought to be, because you're a Jain. And that's how I deal with it. How I do it outside of my Jainism, because for me, it's all sort of the same. I've been teaching, this is my, I've been teaching for 35 years now in the university. And for much of that time, I've taught courses on human rights and animal rights, or animal ethics and animal law, and things of that nature. And I write. I just got this like 3 days ago. Was my most recent. Just the publisher sent it to me. Is my most recent book, Columbia University publishes, called "Why Veganism Matters: The Moral Value of Animals." And I keep writing this stuff. And I have a website called How Do I Go Vegan, which is, I think, a tremendous resource. There's no donate button. And what there is lots of free information, including, I think we need to make veganism easy. It's not difficult, people say, well, it's so hard to be vegan. No, it's not hard. Do you eat fruits? Yeah. Do you eat vegetables? Yeah. Do you eat beans? Yeah. Do you eat grains? Yeah. Do you eat seeds? Yeah. Do you eat nuts? Yeah. We'll just eat more of those and cut out the decomposing flesh, cow mucus, and chicken ova. It's really quite easy. And everything you need to know, you can learn nutritionally in about 20 minutes if you're a slow reader. It's not rocket science. It's really quite simple. But moving from the Jain community to the sort of the larger community, I have the same problem. I have the same problem with the animal. The animal movement is, I've stated this in writing numerous times, but I think the animal movement fails because it's a business. It's a bunch of charities. They're businesses. They want to keep their donor bases broad. So they basically promote these welfare campaigns and these single issue campaigns. And so, let's get all upset with people in Asia for eating dogs. Yeah, I don't think people in Asia should eat dogs, but I think it's like somewhat xenophobic and ethnocentric for people who eat chickens and pigs and cows and stuff to sort of point fingers at people in Korea or in China and say you're bad. We're better. I think that that's wrong. So they want to keep their donor pools broad, so they basically don't. It's like if you're a reducitarian, that's fine. If you're a pescatarian, that's fine. If you're blah blah blah. And I just think that that's wrong. I think that is not only useless, it's actually worse than useless, because it's counterproductive, and it's encouraging people to believe that there's a right way to do the wrong thing. And that if only they can, it basically reinforces the idea that that we don't have a moral obligation right now to change. And it's like saying, if we were talking about racism or misogyny or other forms of human discrimination, we wouldn't say, well, you got to do it on your own. You got to do it at your own pace. It's like racism is wrong. You may choose to be a racist. There's nothing I can do about that. You may choose to be a racist. You may, misogyny is wrong. You may choose to be a sexist. Nothing I can do about that. But I'm never going to say it's okay and you need to do it on your time. I'm going to tell you, if you are not rejecting it now, your time's already running out. So you need to sort of rethink this. And, yes, I do accept that people sometimes don't like my approach to these things. And I would be lying if I said that I thought that I cared terribly much about it, because I believe we have this obligation. And I think right now, while we're all talking, it's a Sunday. In this part, in England and the United States, it's a Monday other places. But the bottom line is, animals are being slaughtered right now, today, right now. And it's not, for me, I think it's really important to get people who care, either ethically in terms of they care about animal rights, or spiritually they care about nonviolence and animal rights through the lens of nonviolence and their particular spiritual traditions, to get them to see this is ultimately not about them. This is ultimately not an orgy of narcissism. It is focused on the fact that we are responsible for violence against humans and non-humans. We are responsible. We have all sorts of policies that are directly harming human beings. And we are participating in the death of 80 billion land animals. That's 80 billion land animals. And nobody knows the number of sea animals, but at least 1 trillion. Every year, for food alone, not counting all the other ridiculous uses of animals that we make, but every year we are killing, for food alone, more non-humans than the number of humans who have ever lived on this planet since we crawled out of the swamp. And so that is, to me, mind-boggling. And so it's really important to get people. So when somebody says to me, I can't become a vegan, it's just too difficult. Depending on how much time I have, I will try to explain to them, no, it's really easy. I give them the website. It's got recipes, easy, cheap recipes. You can feed a family of 4, on $3. I mean, it's actually cheap to be a vegan. If you don't buy these processed foods, which are not good for you anyway and have a lot of salt, it's actually very cheap to be a vegan. And so, but I think, if somebody says to me, I can't become a vegan right now, should I buy cage-free eggs or should I be a reducitarian? I basically say, look, you have an obligation to do it now. If you choose to not do it, that's your choice. I'm never going to put a stamp of approval on telling you to eat cage-free eggs or to be a reducitarian or to eat crate-free pork or anything like that. I'm not going to do it. And if you think that that's harsh or whatever, sorry. I don't care, because ultimately it ain't about me. It ain't about you. It's about them. It's about the victims. And that's the way all rights movements should be. They should be focused on the beneficiaries, the beings you're trying to bring justice to. That's what it's about. And that's why, anyway, so that's my approach. It's somewhat unequivocal.
Thank you so much, Gary. And we're running a little bit over, but before we wrap up, I'd really love to give everyone a chance to talk about the amazing projects, starting with Eunice, who mentioned some of the stuff in her bio, but anything else you want to say about projects? I learned Alan's writing a book. I know Nico just had a journal article published. Gary mentioned a new book. So why don't we take a few minutes to just touch on some of the great work that's either happened or forthcoming, starting with Eunice.
Yeah, so I'm an actor, and of course, when COVID happened, all the theaters got shut down. And I have occasionally over the years done audiobooks for Audible, and other publishers. And I realized that was the thing to do during COVID. So I got myself, equipment and a booth, and I've been recording audiobooks. And it occurred to me that what I really want to do with this investment in equipment and, and expertise, really, because I've learned, digital audio workstations and how to record and aspects of engineering, is I want to create audiobooks to encourage people to become vegan, because people listen to audiobooks when they don't have time to read. They commute, or maybe they don't commute now, but they multitask, and it's just another way of getting the message out there, right? And it's an incredibly intimate medium. Right now I'm working on 2 books with Lantern Press, Letters to a New Vegan and Defiant Daughters, and I have another one in the works, but I don't want to say it because it's not contractually official yet. But for instance, Letters to a New Vegan is a collection of letters from vegans all over the world to the new vegan, right, who might be feeling isolated or overwhelmed. And it's messages of, you can do it. This is what you can do. Random tips. This is what helped me when I was where you are. And I wish someone had told me this years ago. And to be able to put that out there for someone who would need it, right, and who doesn't have a community to tell them these things, is something that strikes me as what I want to do with my time and my ability and my equipment and my expertise. So that's what I'm currently sort of diving into at the moment.
That's fantastic, Eunice. Thanks so much. Alan, would you like to talk a little bit about the book you're working on? Is that at a place you can, talk about it? It's news to me and I'm thrilled.
Well, the book is about vegan Buddhism, but I have a lot of books inside of me. I just need to find the time to set aside to write all those books. I'm not new to any of this stuff, and I've been a hardcore yogi since I was born and in a previous life, and I have a lot and on yoga topics that I can also talk about. And Buddhism is so vast. I mean, less than 1% of Buddhism has even been translated into English. I have a lot of teachings and a lot of what they call restricted teachings that none of this has seen the light of day. So that's a mountain of work that needs to be brought to light. But my main focus is veganbuddhism.com, and also that basically leads people to the Facebook page. I have over 7,000 followers. That's not enough. I'm sorry. And the audience is really not vegans. A lot of vegans come to the group and say, "You're preaching to the choir." No, I'm not. I'm giving you ammo so that you can take it out to all the other groups. These are memes. Please take these memes. Please take this information and share it with the world. My main target audience is all the non-vegans. And what I call it, it says that right in the rules at the very top in the introduction. You do not have to be vegetarian or vegan to be in this group, nor do you even have to be Buddhist. And it's for those people who are curious minded, that wants to know what this is about. And if you are somebody who's a meat eater, maybe you might, after visiting this group, be educated to all the benefits of giving up meat or giving up eggs or giving up dairy. And if you are a hardcore vegetarian, hey, this gives you an excellent, your dogs in the background. So this gives you an excellent opportunity as a vegetarian to see the benefits of being a vegan. And it's really, like Gary said, it's not hard to become a vegan. It's a personal choice, and you just do it. And so with that in mind, just do it. And I would encourage people that come to vegan Buddhism to invite all their friends, anyone who's vegan curious or vegetarian or just maybe involved in the environmental movement or whatever. There's a lot of non-spiritual people that tend to navigate towards Buddhism because it's not a heavy orthodox aspect. It's more of a philosophy. Maybe they might get a few things. These are practical life skills and knowledge and a good philosophy to know about. And it doesn't matter what religion or what your spiritual background is. Everyone can learn something from Buddhism. So invite all your friends. If you got relatives that are annoying and you're tired of explaining why you're a vegan, invite them to vegan Buddhism, because you'll be surprised how many come there. And then later on, thank me. Oh, I was this horrible meat eater. It's like this testimonial thing that they give. And it was your site that helped convince me to give up meat. And those are my success stories that are wonderful. And I'm looking for a lot more than just 7,000 members. I would like 7 billion members, So the more the merrier. And please, those people that come there that think they know it all, hey, I'm giving you ammo to put on other vegan groups and other Buddhist groups, especially the Buddhist groups. I think the Buddhists need the most education because a lot of them still consume eggs and dairy, and they give all sorts of crazy justifications for eating meat. And they try to cite, spiritual text and stuff. Oh, the Buddha eats meat and all this. No, that's not true. You guys are, like the Buddha said, delusional. I mean, if you want to really see what Buddha thought about eating meat, I encourage people to read the Lankavatara Sutra. He's very clear about what he has to say about things, and he doesn't pull any punches. It's very straightforward. The chapter is called "Do Not Eat Meat," but I do warn that there are a lot of copies of the Lankavatara Sutra where that chapter, "Do Not Eat Meat," has been removed. And they say, well, it's not a really necessary teaching of the Buddha, and it has really nothing to do with the precepts of non-harming and blah, blah, blah. They give all sorts of excuses. But these are essentially, and some of them are scholars. I mean, we're talking universities and colleges that are releasing versions of the Lankavatara where they exclude that chapter. And it's kind of crazy making. So if you do get a copy of it, make sure it has that chapter 16, "Do Not Eat Meat." That's it.
Thanks so much, Nico. Love to
Thank
hear.
You for inviting me.
Thank you. Would love to hear, Nico, some of your work. I know you are doing some really great work.
Cool. I'll keep it hopefully short and succinct. So I just had the opportunity to publish an article with the Journal for Critical Animal Studies, and it's about this idea. It's called the Liberation Pledge, and it's a commitment to never eat in the presence of folk who are consuming animal products. So the idea is to extend our veganism from a passive action that we're doing by ourselves in our own households, and extending it out into everyone we interact with. It's kind of like just how Gary will not speak at a conference if folk in the audience are, if they're going to be serving animal products. It's that same type of idea with every interaction we have. And then I'm publishing a chapter with Lantern and with Routledge this coming year. But I think if anyone is interested in connecting, I love connecting with folk. And so Nico Stubler is my name, and you can find me on Facebook or Instagram. And I'd love to connect and share some stuff. Thanks.
Nico, thank you so much. And Gary, you mentioned to me the when we spoke last, you have a new book coming out.
Yeah, it just came out. Well, at least I don't even know if it's available. I mean, the publisher sent me, Columbia University sent me some copies, and they did a pretty good job on the production. But it's basically, it's called "Why Veganism Matters: The Moral Value of Animals," and it's basically aimed at people who claim to care about animals, because there's lots of people who care about animals but who aren't vegan. And what I basically argue in the book is that animals either have moral value or they don't have moral value. If they don't have moral value, if you think that they are simply things that don't have any moral value, there's really not much you can say to such a person. But if you think animals have moral value, it doesn't matter whether you think they have the same moral value as humans do, although I think that's a problematic concept. But even if you reject that, if they have any moral value, I argue that we cannot use them exclusively as resources. So the very minimum that we owe animals is to stop using them as commodities and stop eating them, wearing them, and using them. And I discuss a little bit about the law, and I explain how laws about humane treatment don't work because animals are chattel property, and so that the level of animal welfare is always going to be low because it costs money to protect the animal interest, and therefore the idea, the humane treatment is a fantasy. It's a complete fantasy. It's about making us feel more comfortable. It has nothing to do with helping animals. And so, as I said, this is my 9th book. My other books some of them are academic. We have 3 books that Anna Charlton and I co-wrote together that are activist books: Eat Like You Care, Animal Rights, The Abolitionist Approach, and Advocate for Animals, an Abolitionist Vegan Handbook. And they are directed towards activists. And the idea is to sort of, for example, the most recent one, Advocate for Animals, that we did 2 years ago, is a book that sort of gives you actual dialogues on how do you talk to your to your partner, to your parents, to your whatever, and it gives you examples and things. On Wednesday, I'm going to have shoulder surgery because I fell and I injured my shoulder. And since this is my right hand, I fell on the arm that I use. And so I have to have shoulder surgery. And I've been told that I'm not going to be able to do much with the arm for a few months. So I bought a couple of books on podcasting, and I'm going to start getting into podcasting. I've got a page on Facebook. It's got about almost 80,000 people. It's called Animal Rights, The Abolitionist Approach. And, we talk to people, it's a page in which we talk about abolition. The abolitionist approach is an approach that I started developing in the late 1980s and developed through the 90s and continued to develop. And it's basically a theory of non-human rights and human rights, and it's basically the idea that all sentient beings have the right to have the right not to be chattel property. This requires that we abolish and not regulate animal exploitation. Veganism is the moral baseline. It's what we owe to it's the minimum. It's the moral minimum of what we owe to animals. It's not where you should get after decades of thinking about the issue. It's where you should start once you recognize that animals matter. Boom, that's it. Veganism is the only rational response to that. Sentience is the only characteristic that matters. Animals don't have to have intelligence, human-like intelligence in order to matter morally, just like people of color don't have to be light-skinned to matter morally. I mean, it's just nonsense, anthropocentric nonsense in the same way that's racist nonsense. And then I talk about the relationship between human discrimination and non-human discrimination, the fact that it troubles me greatly that the animal movement is not a progressive left movement, which is what it should be. It should be a movement that rejects all racism, all sexism, all classism, all of that sort of stuff. It's all a form of violence. It should be rejected. Some of these animal groups are distressingly reactionary and embrace distressingly reactionary ideas. I've had arguments with people, some of them on my page, that are in which they're promoting, all I have to do is post a Black Lives Matter thing to have animal people come to my page and tell me I shouldn't be talking about Black Lives Matter because Black people are not promoting the animal cause. So why the hell do I care about about violence against people of color? I actually would like to do a book of insane things that people have said to me over my life, but there would be multiple volumes of that. And about nonviolence, basically, as a general matter. The last principle is the principle of nonviolence. So I developed that stuff. I keep writing. I mean, the book is the most recent thing, but I had an essay just come out in something called The Philosopher, which is the journal of the Philosophical Society of England, which has been in publication since I think 1923, and it's a pretty major, heavy duty publication, and I've got a piece in there about veganism, and so I continue to do this stuff. I teach, I write, and the one thing I think is really important is that a lot of people listening to this are saying, well, these people have they've got a bigger audience, they can talk to larger numbers of people. Yeah, that's true, we do, but the most important thing you can do is talk to people on a one-to-one. Yeah, I do these classes, and I do, I'm a professor, and I write books and stuff, but one of the most valuable things I think I do is the conversations I have with people at the grocery store through our masks. When somebody asks me why I have 12 heads of kale in my basket, I mean, and things like that. And I talk to people, I never let a day go by that I don't talk about veganism, ever. I talk about it constantly with people, constantly. If everybody who is vegan right now, if everybody was vegan, who's vegan now, turned one other person onto veganism in the next year, and then that group the next year turned everybody onto turned one person onto veganism, and we did that for 15 years, the world would be vegan. So we have to understand, we all have an ability to change minds and to educate people. We need to learn. You don't have to have a PhD in philosophy. You don't have to have, but you do have to educate yourself, because we're trying to fight thousands of years of anthropocentric thinking. And you don't do that by, just jumping in and babbling. You really have to sort of educate yourself so that you can have intelligent conversations with people, and so that you can sort of answer their questions about what about this and what about that? Doesn't God want us to eat animals? And what about tradition? And what about, isn't it natural? And isn't it, and that sort of stuff. And to just sort of educate people. You need to educate yourself before you educate other people. But all of us can be educators, and all of us need to be educators. The world is never going to change. It's never going to change as a result of humane treatment laws. They are worthless. They are useless. They will only change if we build an abolitionist vegan community of people who are opposed to animal exploitation, and people who see the connections, and who recognize that we shouldn't be using sexism to promote animal rights. We shouldn't be ignoring racism. We should be engaging. All of these things are related. They're all forms of violence, and in many ways, they're all this. In certain ways, the same form of violence. One thing I would say, Nico, is I have written about this this liberation pledge about not eating. I will eat with people who are eating animal products, because I use that. I will not eat with people who won't talk with me about veganism while they're eating animal products. So I will have those, because I think it's important. I will not go and give a lecture to someplace that is being so disrespectful of my views that they're going to serve, milk or some other animal product at an event that I'm speaking at, and I'm not charging them an honorarium for. But I will eat with people as long as they have no problem with my making it clear that what's on that table is problematic. Now, I don't get asked to eat with a whole lot of those sorts of people, but if people know me, generally, if you know me and you're not a vegan, you're not going to have me, you're not going to invite me out. But I do think it's important to engage people. I don't want to draw those sorts of lines, because I don't want to say, well, if you're not a vegan, I won't talk to you. I'll talk to you if you're not eating animal products while we're, for dinner. But if you're eating animal products as a general matter, why am I drawing the line? Why am I talking to you at all? Why am I talking to you at all? And so I just think it's important for us to engage people, but always be clear. And I liked what you said before. I agree with you completely. Never sugarcoat it. Never, ever, ever do anything but be clear that exploiting the vulnerable is wrong. It is unjust. We must stop it. And if we don't stop it, it threatens our spiritual health, our physical health, and the health of the planet.
Everyone, on that note, I just want to say, to add to what Gary said, our mental and emotional health suffers by being, it goes beyond, it's literally comprehensive, the amount of suffering. The alienation from participating in that is a great American academic by the name of John Senbon-Matsu, who writes about that, the alienating impact by exploiting any sentient being. So everyone has been so generous with their time. This has been just absolutely fantastic. I have no words for how much I appreciate the way you all showed up today. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Tim, because he's going to wrap up. But, everyone gave some good information about contact. Please, look for people online. And thank you again to all the panelists. What a wonderful job.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Phil.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, folks. That was really, really interesting. That's a brilliant talk, a really good panel, and a great way to wrap up our weekend. and just to emphasize how important it is to encourage so many people now. We've got a real opportunity this next few years. We've got to take it, and then encouragement to keep doing this work, especially now we've got a global link up. And Philip, you didn't get a chance to say what you're up to next, but whatever it is, hopefully we'll be doing some more stuff together. But you've been really staunch with this. So it's been a very, very interesting panel. So once again, just to underline that, Philip says thank you. I say thank you again. And we welcome all of you back again. I hope to see you again. We'll be in touch with all of you. Thanks. Lovely.
Thank you.
Take care, Tim. Take care, Phil. Bye, everybody.